to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today, we're continuing our celebration of St. Patrick's Day with Part 2 of The Druid's Harp of Ireland, an adaptation of an Irish myth written for you by Daniel Hinds. If you haven't already, listen back to Part 1 so you'll be all caught up. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! The Druid's Harp of Ireland, Part 2. Dagda's harp was missing. The Druid stared at the table where he had left it. There was nothing there but scratched wood and a wet Fomorian handprint. Lou raged nearby, but Dagda himself just felt numb. The creatures had stolen his instrument. He would have sooner they'd taken his foot. That harp was a part of him, as was the music it made. And it was missing, gone, stolen.
They dare touch your harp. I'll see these monsters exterminated to the last,
Lou bellowed.
Let me take 100 ships, and we'll go to their little island and end them all.
Dagda shook himself from his stupor. His harp was gone, but his magic didn't come from his harp. No, the harp was just a focus, like the needle pulling a thread. The magic, that was in Dagda's bones, deep and heavy as a drumbeat. He wanted to rage like Lou, but he had to be the wiser head. He would get the harp back himself, and he'd do it without violence.
Those insolent, those monstrous, those!
The Druid smiled at his friend and laid a calming hand on his shoulder. I know you would avenge this for me, but I've had my fill of fighting. I think I have a better way. Lou hefted his magic spear, frowning deeply.
When it comes to monsters, there is no better way. Don't tell me you have a song for this as well.
Dagda nodded his head, pulling on his hazel-colored druid cloak. When you strike a monster down with your spear, another takes its place. After years of battle, what have we gained?
Many less Fomorian monsters.
Many less, but there are still many more. Let me try this my way.
Fine,
said Lou, uneasily.
I don't doubt your power or your courage, you know that. It's your too kind heart I worry for. You go singing to these beasts and I fear they'll tear it out.
Dagda smiled again and buttoned his cloak up tight. Give me until dawn tomorrow. If I'm not back, come after me and have your battle.
That's a deal,
said Lou, and the pair clasped hands. Not an hour later, as the sun set behind the iron clouds, Dagda set off in a little rowboat. The Irish had long known that the Fomorians were coming from a tiny island, but the only way into their kingdom was a narrow crack at the base of a cliff. The crack was open to the water, and the waves surged in and out endlessly, smashing any intruders into the jagged rocks that thrust up from the water on either side. It was as good as a castle gate, unless you were a druid. When Dagda found the crack, he slipped from his boat and into the icy sea. The current swept him towards the rocks, but he whispered a spell and the waves calmed, carrying him gently into the lair of the monsters. Once inside, Dagda pulled himself from the water and onto a gravel bench. It was dark in the chamber, but he could see the flickering glow of torches ahead. Quiet as a cat, he moved towards the light, finally rounding a corner and entering the grand hall of the Fomorians. It stretched on, with crudely vaulted ceilings and walls of stone and dirt. Monstrous Fomorians sat at driftwood tables, tearing meat from bones. Others fought in sandy pits for cheering crowds, and the rest chattered in their strange, gargling language. There were thousands of them, more than the Irish had ever imagined. And there, in the center of the grand hall, on a salty pedestal of coral and bone, stood Dagda's harp. As he watched, a Fomorian tried to play it, running a razor claw along the strings. The strings stood still as stone, refusing to make even a note. They had been enchanted by Dagda himself and would sing for no one else. Seeing the monsters in their thousands, the old Druid realized he had no hope of stealing the harp back. No, it was time for something else. Something he had hinted at to Lou. something he really hoped would work. Throwing off his cloak, he strode into the hall. Seeing him, the Fomorians all stopped and turned. As one, they hissed and licked their lips, revealing shark-like teeth set deep in bone-white gums. They crowded forward, surrounding the Druid and cackling. "I am Dagda, and I am here for my harp." He used his magic to try and make the creatures understand and speak his language. They understood well enough, it seemed, as they all started to laugh and sneer.
"No harp, Dagda,"
the biggest one managed to croak.
"Harp, ours, Dagda, dinner."
The circle around the Druid began to close. On every side, he saw spit-shined fangs and hungry, too wide eyes. "Sorry," he said,
"but I am Dagda, and I am here for my harp."
On the pedestal, the harp trembled at the sound of his voice.
"The buzzing of a honeyed hive, the wind through apple's tree, summer sweet and spring alive, my beauty, come to me."
At his words, the harp flew from the pedestal. Fomorians yelped and dove for it with their spindly limbs, but it crashed right through, sending them flying in all directions. Finally, like a child into its parents' arms, the harp thumped into the waiting embrace of Dagda the Druid.
"Now, let me show you how it sounds,"
he said, and then began to play. The Fomorians, in the very act of crouching to leap at him, froze on their heels. The song poured from the strings. It was sad, a mournful ripple that spoke of the Irish suffering at the hands of the monsters, a dirge that had all the sadness of stolen crops and stolen cows and burned-out homes. It was a song of loss, and it was so powerful that the Fomorian snarls faded to frowns, and then the screams to sniffles. It kept on until every one of the monsters was crying, sobbing, rolling on the floor in tears. Dagda nodded to himself as he plucked the gold and silver strands. He had been afraid the creatures were too monstrous for even music, but he should have known better. Music spoke to something deeper, something even evil spirits couldn't seem to touch. The Druid played on. Once he was sure the creatures truly felt their guilt, he switched his music. In an instant, the song was cheerful and peaceful. It spoke of what life could be like if the Fomorians were kinder. If instead of war, they would befriend the Irish. This song was harder to play, even for Dagda. The creatures didn't want to hear it, not at first, but the old Druid was the greatest player who had ever lived. He kept on, his fingers flying, magic shining, and soon the monsters were smiling and laughing, rolling on the dirty floors in joy.
"And now, to give you some time to think,"
Dagda said, and he launched into his final song. This one was slower, the notes ringing out and fading before the next one came. It was the sound of slumber. It was the sound of dreams. It was the sound of a warm and cozy bed after a day out in the cold, and Dagda's gentle voice rose to meet it, filling the hall. As he played, the creatures started to yawn and rub their eyes. Fangs and claws forgotten, they began to nod with heavy heads.
When I was a baby, the moon was still young, and she was me mother, me da was the sun. By daylight he'd watch me, by starlight she'd sing, and I'd trade all the world just to hear her voice ring. She's calling Paddy, me laddie-o, you comin' home to stay. Come, come, me only son, and let me light your way. So snuggle your rags up and draw in your claws. Rest your fangs easy and put up your paws. So maybe you're monsters, but still you must sleep. You've got bones to dream of and nightmares to creep. I'm calling Patty, me laddie-o, you coming home to stay. Come, come, me only son, and let me light your way. Monsters, you're weary, your warring is through, but I'll leave you snoring as a gift all to you. So sleep well your slumber, you fishy old ghosts, and you keep your claws far from the Irish coast.
As the last note faded away, there was silence in the hall. All of the Fomorians were sleeping soundly, snoring in their strange, gargling way. Satisfied, Dagda wrapped his harp in his cloak and headed back home to the Irish shore. Dagda's boat wasn't halfway home before the sun began to rise, and with the sun came ships, swelling on the southern horizon. As the lead ship got closer, Dagda saw Lou in the front, boot on the prow and spear in hand.
"I see you got your harp back,"
the warrior said when the ships were side by side.
"How did it go with the Fomorians?"
"Fairly well, actually," Dagda replied. "The monsters shouldn't be bothering us again."
"What? I thought you didn't want to fight. Did you slay them?"
"Of course not."
"Then how?"
Dagda smiled, cradling his harp to his breast. "I played them a song." Lou shook his head, reaching down and pulling Dagda up into his ship. Of course, he had to hear the story, and once he'd heard it, the rest of the Irish needed to hear it as well. And so it went, passing from mouth to mouth all down through the years to here, where I bring it to you. And the Fomorians? They remained frozen in their magic slumber, and without their attacks, Ireland flourished, peaceful and green. And that's one of the reasons why today you'll see the simple harp as a symbol of Ireland and all that it can accomplish. The end. Thanks for listening!